The rain was falling over the shining towers of the alien city. Lights flickered across the sky as flying machines moved like silent birds. In the middle of this alien world stood a single human, a soldier far away from his home planet. His name was Daniel, and he was the last human mercenary hired in this empire. Daniel had fought in many wars, but nothing felt as strange as this new mission. He was called by the great noblewoman Lady Serath, ruler of one of the strongest houses in the galaxy. Her palace was guarded by tall warriors with shining armor and long energy spears. They looked down on Daniel with cold eyes, whispering that a human was too weak for such a task. But Lady Serath had chosen him, and no one could question her order. Inside the grand hall, the noblewoman sat on a throne of silver stone. Her eyes were sharp, her voice calm but filled with power. She looked at Daniel as if she could see into his soul. "Human," she said, "I give you a mission that no one else can complete. You will protect my daughter no matter the cost." Daniel felt a chill run through his body. He had guarded generals, traitors, even alien priests, but never the child of such a powerful leader. He bowed slightly, but not too low, because humans never bowed too much. "Why me?" he asked, his voice steady. "You have hundreds of soldiers stronger than me, faster than me, richer than me." The hall became silent. Only the sound of the rain outside could be heard. Lady Serath leaned forward, her eyes glowing in the pale light. "Because strength is not enough," she said. "Because speed is not enough. There is something in humans that the enemy fears. They cannot control your minds. They cannot break your spirit. That is why you must protect her." At that moment, the doors opened and the daughter entered. She was young, with long silver hair and bright eyes that carried both innocence and sadness. Her name was Alira, heir of House Serath. She looked at Daniel with curiosity, almost disbelief. "Is this the human?" she whispered, her voice soft. Daniel stood firm, his scars telling stories of battles he had survived. "Yes, child," her mother said. "This is your protector." Daniel gave a small nod. "I will protect you," he said simply. Alira looked at him again as if she was trying to read something hidden. For a moment she seemed about to smile, but then her face turned serious. The weight of her future pressed on her shoulders, and Daniel could see it. She was not just a girl. She was a symbol, a target, and now his duty. That night, Daniel was given a small chamber near the princess's quarters. He sat by the window, watching the alien city. Strange lights moved in. The distance and the sound of machines hummed through the streets. But his instincts told him something darker was hiding behind this beauty. He had learned long ago to trust those instincts, and tonight they whispered danger. Suddenly, a faint sound echoed through the hall. It was soft, almost too soft. But to a soldier it was clear. Footsteps where there should be none. Daniel moved quickly, silent as a shadow, his hand on the pulse blade at his side. The corridor was empty, but the air was tense. He saw a flicker, a shape moving across the wall. Then, an explosion of sparks as a cloaked figure lunged toward Alira's door. Without hesitation, Daniel charged. The assassin swung a curved blade, glowing with poison light. Daniel blocked with his arm guard, the impact shaking his bones. But he did not fall. He pushed forward, driving his shoulder into the enemy's chest. The alien assassin hissed, vanishing into smoke. But not before Daniel cut deep across its side. Blood, black and strange, spilled on the floor. The assassin fled into the shadows, disappearing before guards even arrived. Alira opened her door, fear in her eyes. "Are you hurt?" Daniel asked, his voice calm even though his heart raced. She shook her head, her hands trembling. You fought him alone," she whispered. Daniel nodded. "That is what I was ordered to do." The guards rushed in, too late, confused and ashamed. Lady Serath soon followed. Her face unreadable, but in her eyes a flash of satisfaction appeared. "You see now," she told her daughter, "why I chose him." Alira looked at Daniel again, but this time her eyes were different. Not just curious, not just doubtful, but something deeper. She had seen him fight, and she had seen him bleed without fear. And though she did not speak it, she began to trust him. Later, when the halls were quiet again, Daniel returned to his chamber. He cleaned his blade slowly, the black blood still burning his skin. He thought of the noble woman's words. Something in humans that the enemy fears. He did not know what that meant yet, but he knew one thing. This was no simple mission. This was only the beginning. The palace was quiet after the attack, but Daniel knew quiet often meant danger. The alien guards doubled their patrols, their shining armor clanking in the halls. They held their spears tightly, yet none of them had moved fast enough to stop the assassin. Daniel could feel their silent jealousy and anger, because a human had done what they could not. He ignored their stares, because his focus was only on the mission. Protect the daughter. Protect Alira. That was his purpose now. But deep inside, he wondered, who had sent the assassin? Why would anyone risk breaking into the house of Lady Sereth, one of the most powerful rulers in the empire? The next morning, Alira asked to walk through the city. Her mother agreed, but ordered 10 guards to surround her. Daniel stayed close at her side, his eyes scanning every shadow. The city was alive with strange colors, glowing towers and floating bridges. Merchants shouted in alien tongues, selling food that smelled like fire and smoke. Children with bright eyes pointed at Daniel, whispering, "Human, human," as if he were a rare beast, Alira noticed, and she smiled for the first time since Daniel met her. "They look at you with fear and wonder," she said softly. "Humans are rare here," Daniel replied. "Some think we are weak, some think we are dangerous, but few truly know us." Alira tilted her head, her silver hair catching the sunlight. "And which one are you, weak or dangerous?" she asked almost playfully. Daniel did not smile, but his voice was steady. "Both, depending on who I face." Her smile faded when she saw something across the street. A dark figure stood at a corner, not moving, not speaking, only watching. Daniel's hand went to his blade at once, but when he turned fully, the figure vanished into the crowd. He did not chase because leaving Alira unguarded would be worse. Still, his instincts screamed. This was not over. That night, Daniel searched the palace for weak spots. He studied windows, doors, and shadows, marking the places where an enemy might strike. In the library, he found Alira reading alone, her face hidden behind a glowing screen of alien script. "You should not be here without guards," Daniel said. She looked up. "I do not need guards. I have you." Her words were simple, yet they carried a strange weight. Daniel stood by the door, silent but watchful. Suddenly, the lights in the hall flickered. The air grew cold, a strange humming filled the palace. Daniel's heart quickened. He had felt this before, on battlefields where enemies used cloaking tech. "Stay behind me," he ordered Alira, pulling her close. Shadows rippled across the ceiling, forming into shapes. Then 3 assassins dropped silently into the room, their blades glowing green. The guards outside shouted, but they were too far. Daniel had no time to wait. The first assassin rushed forward, fast like lightning. Daniel blocked with his forearm, feeling the heat of the blade scorch his armor. He countered with a hard punch, breaking the alien's jaw with a sickening crack. The second assassin tried to grab Alira, but Daniel kicked him back, sending him crashing into a shelf of books. The third moved like smoke, almost invisible, but Daniel's eyes were trained to see death before it struck. He slashed across the air, and the hidden figure cried out, dropping its weapon. Books burned. The room filled with sparks and smoke. Alira screamed but stayed close, trusting Daniel's shield. The assassins were skilled, faster than the one before, but Daniel fought with something more. Not speed, not strength, but human will. Every time he was knocked down, he rose. Every cut only made him angrier. By the time the guards finally entered, all 3 assassins lay broken on the floor. The guards stared in disbelief, their armor untouched, their pride wounded. Daniel stood bleeding, but alive, his blade still hot with enemy blood. Lady Sereth entered, her sharp eyes moving across the wreckage. She looked At her daughter first, making sure she was unharmed. Then her gaze shifted to Daniel, who stood like a wall of flesh and iron. "You see," she said to the guards, "this is why a human is more valuable than 10 of you." The guards lowered their eyes in shame, but anger burned behind their silence. That night, when the palace was calm again, Daniel sat by the window bandaging his wounds. Alira came quietly, holding a small silver bowl with healing water. "You should rest," she said. Placing the bowl near him, Daniel shook his head. "Rest is a luxury I cannot afford." She sat beside him, her voice softer now. "Do you ever fear death?" she asked. Daniel looked at her, his eyes tired but unbroken. "I fear failing my mission more than I fear dying." Alira was silent for a long time, then whispered, "My mother chose you for more than strength, didn't she?" Daniel did not answer, but deep inside he knew the truth. Something about this mission was hidden, something far bigger than he understood, and in the shadows of the city, the hidden enemy was already planning their next move. The palace no longer felt safe after the second attack. Guards stood on every corner, their armor shining under the lights. Yet Daniel knew armor could not stop shadows. He had fought enough wars to understand that enemies never gave up once. They had failed. If they tried twice, they would try again, stronger and smarter. But something else had changed. Alira, the daughter he was ordered to protect, no longer looked at him with doubt. Now her eyes followed him with quiet curiosity, as if she was studying more than his sword. She had seen him fight. She had seen him bleed, and yet he did not break. That image stayed with her, shaping how she thought of humans. One evening she asked to walk in the palace gardens. The guards wanted to surround her, but she refused. "I only want him," she said, pointing to Daniel. The guards exchanged uneasy glances, but Lady Serath agreed. Daniel walked at her side as the moonlight fell on strange flowers that glowed softly in the dark. The garden was quiet. Only the sound of wind passing through crystal leaves filled the air. Alira bent down, touching one of the flowers gently. "It looks alive, but it hides poison," she said. Daniel looked at the plant carefully, his soldier's eyes always expecting danger. "That is how enemies work," he answered. "They hide their blade behind beauty." She glanced at him, her lips curving in a faint smile. "Do humans always speak in warnings?" Daniel shook his head. "We speak in truths even if they are bitter." For a while they walked without words. Daniel kept scanning the shadows, but he noticed Alira's silence was not fear. It was thought, deep thought. Finally she spoke, her voice softer than before. "My mother trusts you more than her own soldiers. Do you know why?" Daniel paused but did not answer quickly. "I only know what she told me," he said at last. "That humans cannot be controlled, and that is why she chose me." Alira stopped walking, looking at him directly, her silver eyes bright in the moonlight. "But there is more, isn't there?" she whispered. Daniel held her gaze, but inside he wondered if she was right. The bond between them grew slowly, like fire hidden under ashes. Each day she asked him questions about Earth, about humans, about the wars he fought. Daniel spoke little, but his words carried weight. He told her how humans never surrendered even when they were weak, how they laughed in the face of death, how they stood together when all hope was gone. Alira listened with wonder, because in her world, power always belonged to the strong, but humans, she thought, were strong even when they were broken. One night, as he guarded her chamber, she stepped outside quietly. "You never sleep, do you?" she asked, her voice almost playful. Daniel leaned against the wall, his hand resting on his blade. "Sleep is for those who are safe," he replied. "And you are not safe." Her smile faded, the truth of his words heavy on her heart. "Do you hate this duty?" she asked after a pause. Daniel's eyes softened, though his voice remained steady. "I do not hate duty. I only hate failing it." She looked down, her hands trembling slightly. "You risk your life for me, a stranger," she whispered. "Why?" Daniel studied her for a long moment before speaking. Because your life is more than yours, it is the life of your people, your future, your mother's hope. If you fall, an empire falls with you. His words struck her deeply, because no guard had ever spoken to her like that, not as a princess, not as a symbol, but as someone carrying a heavy burden. And in that moment she felt less alone. But their bond did not escape the eyes of others. The palace guards whispered in anger, their pride wounded by the way Alira chose to trust the human more than them. Servants carried rumors through the halls, saying the daughter spoke to him late at night, saying her eyes lingered too long when she looked at him. Daniel ignored the whispers, but he knew jealousy was as dangerous as blades. Sometimes an enemy wore no cloak, sometimes it wore a familiar face. One day, while training in the courtyard, Alira asked to hold his blade. Daniel hesitated, but finally handed it to her carefully. The sword was heavy in her hands, almost too heavy, but she held it with both arms. "It feels alive," she said, her voice filled with awe. "It feels like it wants to fight." Daniel nodded. Weapons are only as alive as the will of the one who carries them. She looked at him, her eyes steady. "And your will never breaks." Daniel did not answer, but inside, he felt the weight of her words. As the days passed, the bond grew stronger. She laughed more when he was near. She asked questions only he could answer. She even defied her mother's strict commands just to spend more time walking the halls with him. And though Daniel remained guarded, something in his heart began to change. He had been a soldier all his life, fighting for gold, for survival, for orders. But now, for the first time, he was fighting for something else. He was fighting for her. Yet even as this silent bond formed, danger thickened in the air. Daniel could feel it at night, like a storm waiting beyond the walls. Enemies were not giving up. They were only watching, waiting, planning. And deep inside, Daniel knew the truth. The closer he grew to Alira, the more dangerous everything would become. Because bonds were not just strength. They were also weakness. And the hidden enemy would use that weakness when the time came. The night was heavy with silence. The palace guards stood at their posts, but their eyes were restless, their hands tight on their spears. Everyone could feel it, like the calm before a storm. Daniel walked the halls, his senses sharp. Every shadow alive in his mind. Alira had retired to her chamber, yet sleep would not come to her. The memory of the assassins still haunted her dreams. She often rose to speak with Daniel, and tonight was no different. When she stepped into the corridor, she found him standing as if carved from stone. "You never rest," she whispered, almost like a complaint. Daniel's eyes stayed on the dark corners of the hall. "Because the enemy does not rest," he answered. Before Alira could reply, a sudden tremor shook the palace. The ground vibrated. The walls groaned as if struck by thunder. Alira gasped, her hand reaching for Daniel's arm. "What was that?" she cried. Daniel's face hardened. Not thunder, that was an explosion. The alarm bells rang out, sharp and urgent. Guards shouted as heavy footsteps echoed through the halls. From the high windows, Daniel saw dark ships descending from the sky. Their hulls glowed red with fire, their cannons already aimed at the palace. The siege had begun. "Stay close to me," Daniel ordered Alira, pulling her behind him. The first blast tore through the courtyard, fire and smoke rising. Into the air, walls crumbled as enemy soldiers poured through the breach, their armor black and jagged, their eyes glowing with hatred. The palace guards rushed forward, spears clashing with blades, but the enemy came like a flood, unstoppable, countless. Daniel drew his blade, its edge glowing faintly blue. He moved like lightning, cutting down the first wave of attackers that reached the hall. Blood sprayed across the marble floor, the clash of steel echoing like thunder. Alira stood frozen, her eyes wide, watching the human fight like a storm. The guards beside him faltered, yet Daniel pressed forward, unyielding. Every strike was precise, every movement born from years of battle, but no matter how many he cut down, more came. The enemy soldiers were not ordinary. They fought with strange discipline, moving as if guided by one mind, Daniel noticed, their eyes flickering the same way, glowing with a faint red light. They are controlled, he muttered, cutting through another. Not free, not themselves. Alira clutched the edge of his arm, her voice trembling. If they are controlled, then who is controlling them? Daniel's jaw tightened. Someone who fears you alive. The battle spread through the palace. Walls shook, windows shattered. Fire roared in the gardens. From every direction the enemy came, forcing Daniel to fight harder, faster. His body bled from cuts, his arms shook from strain, but his spirit did not break. When a guard beside him fell, Daniel stepped into his place, holding the line. When two enemies leapt toward Alira, Daniel cut them down before their blades could touch her. For hours it felt endless, the siege grinding into every stone of the palace. But the greatest danger was yet to come. From the smoke of the courtyard, a massive figure emerged. An enemy commander, towering and armored in black steel. His blade was twice the size of Daniel's, burning with green fire. The soldiers parted to make way for him, their chants filling the air. Daniel stepped forward, his chest rising and falling with tired breaths. Alira's voice broke through the noise. Don't, he's too strong. But Daniel only tightened his grip on his blade. If I don't stop him, no one will. The clash shook the hall. The commander's blade came down like a hammer, sparks, flying as Daniel blocked with all his strength. The impact forced him to his knees, yet he pushed back, driving the commander away. Strike after strike, the enemy pressed forward, but Daniel answered with his own fury. Each time he was struck, he rose again, his will harder than iron. The battle became not just strength against strength, but spirit against spirit. Finally, Daniel found his chance. The commander raised his blade high for a killing blow. Daniel rolled beneath the strike, his own sword cutting deep into the enemy's side. The black armor cracked. The commander roared in rage. But Daniel did not stop. He drove his blade again, this time through the chest. The commander fell with a heavy crash, his soldiers scattering in panic. The siege began to break, the enemy retreating as fire consumed the courtyard. The guards raised their spears in victory, shouting Daniel's name, but Daniel only turned to Alira, making sure she was still safe. She rushed to him, her eyes wide with relief. You fought like 10 men, she whispered. No, like more than 10. Daniel's body shook with exhaustion, blood dripping down his arm. But his voice remained calm. This was only the beginning, he said. The true enemy is still watching. Alira stared at him, her heart beating fast. She knew then that the bond between them was not only trust, it was something deeper, something unspoken. And though the siege was broken, the war for her future had only just begun. The fires of the siege were still burning when morning came. The palace walls were scarred, the courtyards filled with rubble, and the smell of smoke lingered in the air. Servants rushed to repair the damage. Guards dragged away broken armor and shattered weapons. But even as the sun rose, Daniel knew the battle had not truly ended. The enemy had tested their strength, and they would return stronger than before. Lady Sareth called for Daniel and her daughter in the high chamber of the palace. The room was quiet. Only the sound of wind pushing through the tall windows could be heard. Alira stood close to Daniel, her hands still trembling from the memory of last night. But her mother's eyes were calm, sharp, as if nothing could shake her. Daniel bowed slightly, his body still bruised and bandaged, yet his spirit unbroken. You saved her life again, Lady Sareth said, her voice steady. Daniel did not answer because to him it was duty. Nothing more. But Alira looked at him with eyes full of something he did not name. Her mother noticed, but kept her thoughts hidden behind her cold expression. Then Lady Sareth rose from her throne and walked closer. There are things you do not know, human, she said. Things I can no longer keep hidden. Daniel met her gaze, silent, waiting. Alira looked between them, confused, her voice small. Mother, what do you mean? Lady Sareth lifted her hand, pointing toward her daughter. Alira is not only my child, she is the chosen heir to the Empire's future. Daniel had expected that much, but the weight of her next words struck harder. The enemy hunts her, Because she carries the bloodline that will unite the great houses. If she dies, chaos will rule. Alira's eyes widened, her lips parting in shock. I never asked for this, she whispered. Her mother's face softened only for a moment, then hardened again. It does not matter what you ask for. Destiny does not ask. Daniel stood silent, his hand tightening on the hilt of his blade. He had fought wars for gold, for orders, for survival, but never for destiny. Yet here he was, standing between an empire and its fall. But Lady Serath was not finished. She turned her eyes to Daniel, her voice colder now. You think I chose you only to protect her, but that is not the full truth. Daniel's heart grew heavy, though his face remained stone. What do you mean? He asked, his voice low. The noblewoman stepped closer, her presence filling the room. The enemy can control minds, bend wills, twist soldiers into puppets, but not humans. They cannot touch your kind. They cannot break you. That is why I chose you, she said, her words like iron. But there is more, she added, her eyes narrowing. To keep her safe forever, to keep the empire stable, I demand you become more than her protector. Alira gasped, her hands flying. To her mouth, Mother! She cried, her face burning red. Daniel's chest felt heavy, though he did not move. Lady Serath's voice cut through the silence. You must not only guard her life, but bind your life to hers. You will be her husband, her shield, her son-in-law. The words echoed through the hall like thunder. Daniel clenched his fists, his scars burning with memory. He was a soldier, trained to fight, not to marry. His mind raced with questions, but his voice stayed calm. This was never the mission I agreed to, he said slowly. Lady Serath's eyes narrowed further. Missions change, soldier, and you will obey. Alira stepped forward, her face pale, her voice breaking. Mother, you cannot decide this, she said. He should choose. But her mother shook her head, her voice like stone. He was chosen long before you spoke. His spirit makes him fit. His humanity makes him unbreakable. Only with him at your side will you survive. Daniel turned his eyes to Alira, and for the first time he saw fear not of death but of choice. She looked at him with eyes full of questions, with emotions she could not name. And Daniel, who had never hesitated on a battlefield, felt his heart hesitate here. Silence hung in the chamber. The weight of destiny pressed on all of them. Finally, Daniel spoke, his voice rough. You ask me to give my life for her, that I already accepted. But to give my future, my name, my heart, that is more than an order. Lady Serath's face softened slightly, but her words were still sharp. You will see in time that it is the same thing, for your life is already bound to hers. Alira turned away, her hands trembling. Daniel stood still, but inside his soul burned. He had faced blades, fire, and death, but this new command was something different. A battle of the heart, a war of destiny. As the chamber grew silent once more, Daniel understood one thing. The siege had not been the greatest trial, nor the assassins. The greatest challenge lay ahead, not in steel, not in blood, but in the choice of who he was meant to become. And somewhere, beyond the stars, the true enemy smiled, because they knew the strongest warrior was always most vulnerable when his heart was no longer his own. Daniel left the high chamber with heavy steps. The words of Lady Serath echoed inside his mind. Protector, husband, son-in-law. It was not a mission anymore. It was a chain. He had faced armies and monsters, but this demand shook him more than any blade. Alira followed him quietly through the palace halls. Her eyes searched his face, but Daniel kept his gaze forward. Finally, she spoke, her voice low, almost breaking. I never knew she would say that. Daniel stopped, his hand resting on the cold stone wall. It doesn't matter if you knew or not, he said, his voice rough. Your life is not your own anymore, and now, neither is mine. For the first time, Alira felt guilt heavier than fear. She stepped closer, her hand brushing his arm. "I don't want to be a chain to you," she whispered. Daniel turned, his eyes sharp yet tired. "You are not the chain," he said. "The order is—" Silence grew between them. Outside, the city lights flickered in the night. The sky was restless, ships patrolling like hungry birds. The Empire was still in danger. Yet here they stood, fighting a different kind of battle. That night, Daniel sat alone in his chamber, his sword across his knees. He cleaned the blade slowly, his thoughts heavy. For years, he had lived by duty, obeying orders without question. But now duty demanded his future, his heart, his freedom. He whispered to himself, "I am a soldier, not a husband." Yet deep inside a voice answered, "Then why do you guard her like she is more than duty?" The next morning, Alira came to him, her face pale from lack of sleep. She sat across from him, her voice trembling. "Do you hate me now?" she asked. Daniel shook his head, his eyes steady. "No, I do not hate you. But I fear what this bond means." Alira lowered her eyes, her voice soft. "I fear it too." Her words surprised him, not because of their weakness, but because of their honesty. She was not a ruler at that moment, not an heir, not a symbol. She was simply a young woman trapped by destiny, just as he was. Daniel felt the edge of his anger soften, replaced by something he could not name. Days passed, and the palace lived under constant tension. The guards whispered. The servants carried rumors. Some looked at Daniel with jealousy, others with suspicion. But he ignored them all, his focus always on Alira. No blade reached her, no shadow touched her. And the more time they spent together, the more their bond grew. One evening, as they walked the silent halls, Alira finally spoke what she had buried. "I know my mother's command was unfair," she said. "I know you did not choose this." She stopped walking, turning to face him, her eyes filled with courage. "But if you were free to choose, would you walk away from me?" Daniel froze, her question striking deeper than any weapon. He opened his mouth, but no words came. All his life he had followed orders, lived by rules of duty. Choice was a luxury he had never been allowed. And now, for the first time, he wished he had one. Alira's eyes glistened, her voice shaking. "You fight for me like no one else. You risk your life without hesitation. Is that only duty, or is it something more?" Daniel felt his chest tighten, his scars burning with memories of wars long past. He wanted to say it was only duty, that nothing else mattered. But his silence betrayed him. Alira's lips trembled, a small tear sliding down her cheek. "I don't want to be a burden to you, but I don't want to lose you either," she whispered. Daniel reached out slowly, his hand brushing her shoulder. "You are not a burden," he said, his voice firm. "I have faced death many times, but when I fight for you, it feels different." Her eyes widened, her heart racing. "What do you mean?" she whispered. Daniel pulled his hand back, his voice lowering. "I don't know yet, but it is not only duty." Before she could answer, the alarms rang again. A thunderous roar shook the palace, the enemy striking once more. Daniel's face hardened, his conflict buried under the fire of battle. He drew his blade, stepping in front of Alira. "This war does not wait for hearts to decide," he said. Alira wiped her tears quickly, nodding with resolve. "Then let us survive first, and decide later." Together they ran toward the courtyard where flames lit the night sky. Enemy ships descended once more, their weapons glowing. The guards shouted, arrows of light filling the air. Daniel stood at the front, his blade ready. He looked at Alira, and for the first time, he realized something. His duty and his heart were no longer separate. They had become one. And as the enemy charged, Daniel whispered to himself, "I will protect her, not because of the order, but because I want to." The night sky burned with fire as enemy ships descended on the palace once more. This time there was no testing, no hesitation, it was their full assault. The ground shook with thunder as cannons roared, walls shattered, and the air filled with smoke. The siege was no longer in shadows, it was open war. Daniel stood at the front gate, his blade glowing with blue light. His armor was cracked, his body bruised, but his eyes were unbroken. Behind him, Alira stood with her guards, her face pale, but strong. She knew this was the final stand, and if they failed, everything would end. The enemy poured through the broken walls, endless soldiers with glowing red eyes. They moved like machines, their wills bound by some unseen master. Daniel cut through them like a storm, every swing of his blade leaving sparks in the air. But for every soldier that fell, two more appeared, pressing harder, faster, stronger. The palace echoed with screams, the clash of steel, the roar of fire. Daniel fought until his arms burned, until his lungs begged for air, but still he rose. Still he struck, because he knew if he fell, Alira would fall with him, and if she fell, an empire would collapse. At the heart of the chaos, the enemy commander appeared, not the same as before, but greater, taller, his armor pulsing with strange red light. His voice echoed across the battlefield, deep and terrible. Human, you are nothing. You bleed. You break. You cannot win. Daniel stepped forward, his grip tightening on his sword. Maybe I bleed, maybe I break, but I do not bow, he answered. The commander charged, their clash shaking the courtyard like thunder. Sparks flew with every strike, the ground cracking beneath their feet. Daniel was thrown back, blood spilling from his mouth, but he rose again. The commander laughed, his voice dark. Why do you fight, human? You cannot win. Daniel's eyes burned with fire. I fight because she still lives, he said. Because as long as I stand, you cannot take her. Alira watched, her heart pounding. She wanted to run to him, to shield him. But she knew she could not. This was his battle, his choice, his destiny. Yet her voice rang out, breaking through the chaos. Daniel, you are not alone, she cried. Her words gave him strength, her belief fueling his will. The commander struck again, his blade slamming into Daniel's chest. Pain exploded, his knees buckled, his vision blurred. But deep inside, something burned brighter than pain. The spirit of a human, the will to rise when no one else could. Daniel roared, driving his blade upward, cutting deep into the commander's side. The monster staggered, roaring in rage. Daniel pressed forward, every wound screaming, every muscle burning, until at last his sword pierced the commander's chest. The red light in its eyes flickered, then died. The commander fell, shaking the ground with its final crash. The enemy soldiers froze, their red eyes dimming, their control broken. Without their leader, they scattered into the night, fleeing like shadows chased by fire. The siege was over. The palace stood in ruins, but it still stood. And so did Daniel. Though blood covered his body, Alira ran to him, tears streaming down her face. You did it, she whispered, her hands shaking as she touched his arm. You saved me again. Daniel's breath was heavy, his voice weak but steady. I told you, I would protect you. Lady Sareth entered the courtyard, her eyes sweeping over the destruction. She looked at her daughter, alive and safe. Then at Daniel, broken yet unbowed. For the first time, her face softened with true respect. You have done more than protect, she said. You have proven that humans are not weak, that they are not tools but something greater. Daniel tried to speak, but Alira held him, her voice rising. No, mother, he has proven more than that. She looked at Daniel, her silver eyes filled with fire. He has proven that his heart is stronger than any blade, and I want him not because of your command, but because I choose him. Daniel's chest ached, not from wounds, but from the weight of her words. All his life he had fought for duty, for orders, for survival. But now, for the first time, someone chose him. Not as a weapon, not as a soldier, but as a man. And for the first time, Daniel allowed himself to choose too. He reached for Alira's hand, his voice steady though his body trembled. Then I will not be your protector by command, I will be by choice. Alira's tears fell, but her smile was brighter than the fires around them. Lady Sareth watched, her sharp eyes hiding emotion, but she did not object, for she knew destiny had already taken shape. The night ended with silence, the fires dying into smoke. The palace was scarred, the empire shaken, but hope still lived. Because one human, a soldier from a distant world, had stood against darkness and refused to bow, and in doing so he had not only saved a princess, he had found a new reason to live, but far beyond the stars. Unseen eyes still watched. The war was not finished. The enemy was not gone. This was only one victory, one chapter in a greater struggle, and Daniel knew it. Yet when he looked at Alira, her hand warm in his, he whispered to himself, "Whatever comes next, I will face it, because now I have something worth fighting for."